She is mentally unfit. Your Honor, my father. Desmond sobbed, his voice cracking with a performance worthy of an Academy Award. He gripped the wooden railing of the witness stand, his knuckles white, wiping away a tear that I knew he had practiced in the mirror that morning. She spends money on delusions. She has become paranoid, aggressive, and disconnected from reality. Since her mother passed, she has spiraled completely out of control. I am just trying to protect her from herself. I sat at the defense table completely still. My hands were folded calmly on the table in front of me, betraying none of the rage burning in my chest. The courtroom was silent, save for my father's theatrical sniffling. My sister Tia sat in the front row, dabbing her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, while my brother-in-law Hunter smirked down at his expensive watch, checking the time as if he had a golf tee time to catch. They thought this was the end. They thought they had won. The plan was simple. Paint Keisha as the crazy, unstable daughter, get conservatorship over her life, and drain the inheritance my mother left me. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed the Keisha they bullied at the dinner table was the only Keisha that existed. Judge Reynolds, a stern woman with eyes that missed nothing, looked up from the file in front of her. She adjusted her glasses and stared at my father for a long, uncomfortable moment. The silence stretched until my father shifted nervously. "Desmond," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "You claim your daughter is incapable of managing her own finances because she is unstable, correct?" My father nodded vigorously. "Yes, Your Honor, she is a danger to her own future." The judge leaned forward, her gaze dropping to a document I had instructed my lawyer to slip into the file just 5 minutes ago. "Then perhaps you can explain, Mr. Brooks, why this mentally unfit woman is listed as the primary shareholder of the holding company that currently owns your debt." My father's face went pale. The smirk vanished from Hunter's lips. "Wait. What?" he whispered loud enough for the bailiff to turn his head. "Before I tell you how my family walked into a trap they dug for themselves, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who turned out to be the wolf. This story is for anyone who has ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love them. To understand how we got to that courtroom, we have to go back exactly 2 weeks to the worst day of my life. The day we buried my mother. The funeral was held at the most prestigious chapel in Chicago, just as my father wanted. It was not a service for my mother. It was a networking event for him. The air was thick with the smell of expensive lilies and the suffocating perfume of socialites who barely knew my mom's middle name, but wanted to be seen comforting the grieving CEO. I stood in the back of the vestibule, smoothing down my simple, black dress, watching the circus unfold. I had not shed a tear in public. My grief was private, a heavy stone in my gut that I refused to share with these vultures. "Keisha." A voice dripped with false sweetness behind me. I turned to see Hunter, my sister Tia's husband. He was wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, and a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "You are standing in the way of the guests. Move aside." I took a deep breath. "Hunter, the service is about to start. I am going to find my seat in the front row with Dad and Tia." Hunter let out a short, sharp laugh, heavily laced with condescension. "Oh, about that. We had to make some adjustments to the seating chart." "Adjustments?" I repeated, my voice low. "The front row is for family, Hunter." "Yes, and for key investors." "Dad is trying to impress Hunter." Interrupted, stepping into my personal space, looming over me like he always did when he wanted to intimidate me. "Look, Keisha, we all know you are not exactly the image the family wants to project right now. You look tired, a bit unhinged, honestly. Dad thought it would be best if you sat in the 4th row, behind the senator and the board members. It is just better for the optics." Optics. I felt my blood boil hotter than it ever had. My mother was in a casket 10 feet away, and he was worried about optics. I looked past him to the front row. My sister Tia was already there, checking her makeup in her phone camera, likely preparing for a sad selfie to post to her 2 million followers. My father was shaking hands with a man I recognized as a potential buyer for his failing logistics company. They had erased me from the front row of my own mother's funeral. I will sit where I please. Hunter, I said, attempting to step around him. He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to stop me. Don't cause a scene, Keisha, he hissed, his voice dropping to a menace. Do not embarrass your father today. He is already dealing with enough, having to explain why his eldest daughter is a 32-year-old freelancer with no husband and no prospects. Just go to the fourth row. Know your place for once. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his eyes. I could have caused a scene right there. I could have told him that the freelancer he mocked had just closed a deal worth 3 times his annual salary that morning before breakfast. But I didn't. I pulled my arm away, brushed off the fabric as if he had dirtied it, and walked silently to the fourth row. I sat behind strangers who whispered about my mother's charity work, having never contributed a dime to it themselves. When the time came for the eulogies, I stood up, clutching the speech I had written on trembling paper. It was the only thing I had left to give her a tribute to the woman who had secretly supported me, when my father and sister turned their backs. I stepped into the aisle, but before I could take 2 steps, my father was at the podium. Thank you all for coming, he boomed, his voice filling the cavernous space. We will now hear from my beloved daughter Tia, who was her mother's shining light. I froze in the aisle. The program listed me as the second speaker. My father looked right at me, his eyes hard and warning. Sit down, they said. I looked at Tia, who glided up the stairs, wiping away dry tears, posing for the audience. She launched into a speech that was 90% about her own career struggles, and how Mom was her biggest fan, and 10% about the actual deceased. I stood there in the aisle for a heartbeat too long, realizing the erasure was complete. They had not just moved my seat, they had silenced my voice. I sank back into the pew, my paper crumping in my fist. Rage, cold and sharp, replaced the sorrow. I realized then that my mother was the only shield I had against their cruelty, and with her gone I was exposed. But they forgot that while shields protect, swords attack. The service ended and the crowd shuffled out to the reception hall, focused on the open bar and the hors d'oeuvres. I lingered behind, watching my family hold court like royalty. Desmond laughing a little too loudly, Tia accepting condolences like they were fan mail. Hunter was ushering people toward the exit, guiding the VIPs to their cars. As the crowd thinned, I saw Hunter lean in close to Tia, who was fixing her hair in a compact mirror. Make sure you look presentable for the lawyer, Hunter whispered, his voice carrying in the empty chapel. Echo, we are heading to the reading of the will, immediately. Tia sighed loudly. Ugh, do we have to do it today? I am exhausted from crying. Hunter smirked, patting her shoulder, checking to make sure no one was listening. He did not see me standing in the shadows of a marble pillar. It has to be today, babe. We need to secure the assets before Keisha starts asking questions. Don't worry about the old draft, Mom wrote. I already handled the paperwork with the executor. Everything is going to go exactly how we planned. Just let me do the talking, telling Keisha she gets nothing. Will be the highlight of my year, he laughed, a low, cruel sound that made my skin crawl. They walked out arm in arm, leaving me alone in the silent chapel with the smell of dying lilies. Handled the paperwork. The words echoed in my mind. I looked at my mother's casket one last time, promising her that I would not let them destroy what she built. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to a number, saved only as HC. Initiate the audit. It is time to go to war. The drive to the lawyer's office was suffocatingly silent. I sat in the back of the limousine my father had insisted on renting for appearance sake, while he, Hunter, and Tia sat facing me. They spent the entire 20-minute ride discussing renovations they planned to make to the family estate. Tia wanted to knock down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room to create an open-concept content studio for her live streams. Hunter was talking about installing a wine cellar where my mother's library currently stood. I said nothing. I just looked out the tinted window watching the gray Chicago skyline blur past, knowing that silence was often the loudest scream. When we arrived, Mr. Henderson, my mother's attorney for 30 years, was waiting for us. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. He ushered us into a conference room that smelled of old leather and furniture polish. My father took the seat at the head of the table, adjusting his cufflinks with the air of a man about to be crowned king. Tia sat to his right, checking her reflection in her phone screen one last time. Hunter sat next to her, opening a leather folio and clicking a gold pen, ready to take notes on his new fortune. I took the chair furthest from them, near the door, ready to escape the moment this farce concluded. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and began to read. The preamble was standard legalese, but the tension in the room was tight enough to snap a violin string. My father leaned forward, expecting to hear his name attached to everything my mother had built. To my husband, Desmond. Mr. Henderson read, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. I leave my 51% controlling interest in Brooks Logistics. My father slammed his hand on the table, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. See? He whispered to Hunter. I told you she knew her place. The company is mine. Mr. Henderson did not look up. He waited for the celebration to die down before continuing. However, he said, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. To my daughter Keisha, whom I have watched grow into a woman of quiet strength and resilience despite the shadows cast upon her, I leave the entirety of the family estate located in Highland Park, along with the contents of my personal trust fund and liquid cash reserves totaling $2.5 million. The silence that followed was absolute. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Then the sound of shattering crystal cut through the air. My father had thrown his water glass against the wall, the water dripping down the expensive mahogany paneling like tears. You are lying, he roared, standing up so abruptly his heavy chair toppled backward. That is impossible. She would never leave that house to her. Keisha is incompetent. She has no job. She has no husband. That house is the crown jewel of this family. Mr. Henderson simply pushed his glasses up his nose. The document is ironclad, Desmond. Your wife was of sound mind and body when she signed this 3 months ago. My father turned to me, his face twisting into a mask of ugly rage. You did this, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You poisoned her mind those last few weeks while she was sick. You whispered lies to her while I was out working trying to save this family. You manipulated a dying woman to steal my inheritance. I remained seated, my hands folded in my lap. I did not tell him that while he was out working, he was actually at the casino or with his mistress. I did not tell him that Mom knew everything. I just watched him unravel. Before I could speak, Hunter stood up. He walked around the table slowly, buttoning his suit jacket, putting on his best reasonable man face. He placed a hand on my father's shoulder to calm him down, then turned his gaze to me. His eyes were cold, but his voice was dripping with a sickly sweet condescension that made my stomach turn. Keisha, look at me, Hunter said, crouching down slightly, as if speaking to a slow child. We all know this is a mistake. Mom was on a lot of medication at the end. She was confused. But we can fix this. He pulled a document out of his folio, sliding it across the polished table toward me. Listen, sweetie. You do not understand what owning a $4 million estate means. The property taxes alone are $50,000 a year. Then there is the upkeep, the landscaping, the insurance. A freelancer salary cannot cover that. You will be bankrupt in 6 months, and the bank will take the house. Do not let Mom's legacy go to foreclosure. I looked at the paper. It was a deed transfer giving full ownership of the house to my father. Hunter tapped the paper with his gold pen. Here is the deal, Keisha. You sign this property over to Dad right now. In exchange, we will let you live in the guest suite above the garage rent-free for a year. We will even give you a small allowance from the company profits so you can get back on your feet. It is the best offer you are going to get. Think about it. Do you really want the burden of a mansion you cannot afford? Just be a good sister and sign. The room was quiet again, waiting for my submission. They expected the old Keisha, the one who shrank away from conflict. I stood up slowly, picking up my purse. I looked at the paper, then I looked at Hunter. No. The word was soft, but it hit the room like a gunshot. My father looked like he was about to have a stroke. "What did you say?" he whispered. I said no. I repeated, my voice steady. "I do not need your guest room, and I certainly do not need financial advice from a man whose hedge fund is currently under investigation by the SEC. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak door. As I reached for the handle, Hunter's voice stopped me. It was no longer sweet. It was low and dangerous, a threat wrapped in velvet. "You are making a mistake, Keisha," he said. "You are playing a game you do not know the rules to. You walk out that door with that money, and you will regret it. This family protects its own, and you just decided you are not part of it." I did not look back. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, leaving them with their failing company and their rage. As the door clicked shut behind me, I knew the war had just begun, but for the first time in my life, I had the ammunition to win it. I drove back to my modest two-bedroom apartment in the city center that evening, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. My phone sat on the passenger seat, buzzing incessantly, but I refused to look at it until I was safely inside my sanctuary. When I finally sat down on my sofa and unlocked the screen, I realized the war had moved from the boardroom to the court of public opinion. My notification screen was a wall of text messages from relatives I had not spoken to in years. Cousins who had ignored me at the funeral were now sending long paragraphs calling me an ungrateful daughter. My Aunt Sheila, who had borrowed $5,000 from my mother and never paid it back, texted me saying I was a disgrace to the family name and a gold digger. It was almost impressive how quickly Hunter and Tia had spun the narrative. Curious to see the source of this sudden vitriol, I opened Instagram. There it was at the top of my feed. Tia's story ringed in red. I tapped it and watched as my sister appeared on screen, her face perfectly illuminated by a ring light, tears glistening in her eyes that I knew were summoned with eye drops. "Hey guys," she whispered dramatically into the camera. "I just wanted to come on here and ask for prayers for my family. My older sister, Keisha, is going through a really severe mental health crisis right now. She is trying to take everything our mom built because she is confused and hurting. We are just trying to get her help, but she is being so aggressive. Please pray for my dad, he is heartbroken." I threw the phone onto the cushion beside me. It was a masterclass in manipulation. In one 60-second clip, she had labeled me unstable and positioned herself and my father as the victims. The next morning, I decided to ignore the digital noise and focus on what mattered. I needed to get into the estate, not for the furniture or the expensive art, but for the things that actually held value to me. My mother's photo albums, her jewelry box, and the letters she had written to me when I was a child. These were items I knew Tia would throw in the trash without a second thought during her renovations. I drove to Highland Park, my stomach tight with anxiety. As I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates that guarded the driveway, I punched in the code I had used for 15 years. The keypad flashed red. I tried again, thinking I had made a mistake. Red again. Access. Denied flashed on the small screen. I sat in my car, staring at the keypad, realizing they had moved faster than I anticipated. I was about to reach for the intercom when I saw movement on the other side of the bars. My father walked down the driveway. He was wearing his cashmere cardigan, holding a mug of coffee, looking every bit the lord of the manor. He stopped 10 feet from the gate safe on the other side. "Dad, let me in," I said through the open window, my voice calm. "I just want to get Mom's personal things. You can keep the furniture for now. Just let me get the boxes from her closet." Desmond took a slow sip of his coffee, shaking his head with a look of exaggerated pity. "I cannot do that, Keisha. Not in your condition." "My condition," I repeated. "What condition is that, Dad? The condition where I refuse to let you and Hunter steal my inheritance." My father sighed loud enough for me to hear. See, this is what I mean. You are paranoid. You are seeing enemies where there is only family trying to help you. I changed the codes for your own safety. You are not stable enough to be in this house alone. God knows what you might do. You might hurt yourself or destroy the property in a fit of rage. Until you get professional help and sign the papers giving me conservatorship over the estate, this gate stays closed. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was baiting me. He wanted me to get out of the car. He wanted me to scream and shake the gates. He probably had Hunter recording from the window or had already called the police to report a trespasser. If I caused a scene, I would be the angry, unstable black woman screaming outside a mansion in a white neighborhood. The police would arrive and Desmond would play the grieving, concerned father, and I would end up in psychiatric hold just like they planned. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw a man who was terrified. He was terrified of losing his status, terrified of his debt, and terrified of me. He was puffing up his chest to hide the fact that he was drowning. I realized then that arguing with him was useless. You do not argue with a man holding a match, you just cut off his oxygen supply. I will be back, Dad, I said simply. And when I come back, I won't be asking for the code. I rolled up my window, ignoring his shouts of confusion as I reversed the car. I drove 2 blocks away and pulled into a quiet side street. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a cold, calculated anger. I picked up my phone, but I did not dial 911. Instead, I dialed a number that very few people had. It rang once before a crisp, professional voice answered. Good morning, Ms. Brooks. This is Jasmine. Jasmine was my personal assistant, and the only person who knew the full extent of my business dealings. Jasmine, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I need you to execute Order 66 on Brooks Logistics. Trigger the forensic audit clause in the loan agreement. I want every receipt, every transaction, and every hidden offshore transfer flagged. And Jasmine, freeze their credit lines, all of them, effective immediately. There was a pause on the line followed by the sound of typing. Consider it done, Ms. Brooks. Should I alert the board? No, not yet, I said, watching the roof of my father's house in the rearview mirror. Let him enjoy his morning coffee. It will be the last expensive thing he tastes for a very long time. I hung up the phone and merged back into traffic. They wanted to paint me as the villain, so I decided to become the most powerful antagonist they had ever faced. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2:15 in the morning when the world exploded. I had been sitting in my living room wrapped in a silk robe, nursing a cup of chamomile tea and reading a biography of Madam C.J. Walker. The silence of my apartment was shattered not by a phone call, but by a thunderous pounding on my front door that shook the picture frames on the walls. Police, open up. The shout was aggressive, guttural, and terrified me to my core. For a black woman living alone in America, hearing aggressive law enforcement at her door in the dead of night does not signal safety. It signals danger. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I did not run. I did not scream. I placed my teacup down on the coaster with a trembling hand, took a deep breath to steady my nerves, and walked slowly toward the door. Through the peephole I saw distorted shapes and the blinding glare of tactical flashlights. I unlocked the deadbolt and slowly opened the door, keeping my hands visible at shoulder height. Get on the ground. Ma'am, let me see your hands. 2 officers stood there, guns drawn, pointed directly at my chest. The hallway lights reflected off the metal of their service weapons. Behind them, I could see the flashing red and blue lights of 3 squad cars illuminating the hallway through the lobby windows. Officer, I am unarmed, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. I am wearing pajamas. I have no weapon. Please lower your guns. The lead officer, a middle-aged white man with a buzz cut, scanned me up and down. He saw my silk robe, my bare feet, and the terrified confusion on my face. He signaled to his partner and they lowered their weapons slightly, but kept their fingers near the triggers. We received a 911 call from a family member stating you sent a text message threatening self-harm and claimed you had a loaded pistol in your possession. We need to secure the premises. I stepped back, allowing them to enter. The violation of my sanctuary was visceral. They marched into my living room, their heavy boots tracking mud onto my pristine cream rug. They scanned the room looking for the non-existent gun, looking for the pills or the chaos of a woman on the edge. Instead, they found a half-empty cup of tea, a book with a bookmark in it, and the soft hum of my jazz playlist. Hunter. The name flashed in my mind instantly. This was not a wellness check. This was an assassination attempt by proxy. He knew that sending armed police to my door in the middle of the night could have ended with me dead if I had made one wrong move. "Do I look like I'm about to end my life, officer?" I asked, standing tall in the center of my living room. The lead officer holstered his weapon, looking around the immaculate apartment. He seemed confused, the adrenaline fading from his face replaced by annoyance. "We have a duty to investigate, Mom." The caller identified himself as Hunter, your brother-in-law. He said you texted him at 2 a.m., saying you could not take it anymore. I walked over to the coffee table, moving slowly so as not to startle them. I picked up my phone and unlocked it, handing it directly to the officer. "Check the logs. My last text message was sent at 4 p.m. yesterday to my dry cleaner. There is nothing to Hunter. There is nothing to anyone." The officer scrolled through my phone, his brow furrowing. He checked the sent folder, the drafts, and even the trash. Nothing. He looked at his partner, then back at me. "I also have security cameras inside my apartment," I added, pointing to the small, sleek lens mounted in the corner of the ceiling. "You can review the footage." I have been sitting in that armchair reading for the last 3 hours. I have not touched my phone. I have not paced. I have not brandished a weapon. The officer sighed, clipping his radio back onto his vest. "It appears we have been given false information. I am sorry for the disturbance, Ms. Brooks. We have to take these calls seriously." They left 10 minutes later, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. My hands finally started to shake. I slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I survived. But as I watched the red and blue lights fade from my window, a cold realization settled over me. Hunter knew I did not have a gun. He knew I was not suicidal. He did not care if I got hurt, but that was not his primary goal. His goal was the paper trail. Now there was an official police report. A dispatch log at 2 a.m., officers entering my home. In a courtroom, he would not mention that it was a false alarm. He would only present the incident report. Police called to residents for mental health crisis. It was another brick in the wall he was building to fence me in to prove I was unfit. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city. He thought he had scored a point. He thought he had terrified me into submission. But he had just made a fatal error. He had brought the law into this. And if there was one thing I knew better than him, it was how to use the law to crush your enemies. I went to my desk and opened my laptop. I was not going back to sleep. If they wanted a war involving the authorities, I would give them one, but I would not be the one calling 911. I would be the one calling the auditors. The morning sun felt invasive as I drove to the organic market down the street. After the police raid at 2 in the morning, I had not slept a wink, but I refused to hide in my apartment like a frightened animal. Routine was my armor. I walked through the aisles of the high-end grocery store, placing fresh produce and a bottle of sparkling water into my basket. I kept my head high, ignoring the whispers of the neighbors who had likely already seen Tia's Instagram stories. When I reached the checkout counter, I pulled out the platinum credit card my mother had added me to 10 years ago. It was a joint account meant for family emergencies and household expenses. But since Mom's passing, I had used it for groceries while my personal assets were tied up in investments. The cashier, a young woman who knew me by name, swiped the card. A sharp beep cut through the ambient jazz music. She frowned and wiped the magnetic strip on her apron before swiping it again. Beep? Declined? She looked up at me with an apologetic wince. I am so sorry, Ms. Brooks. It says the card has been reported lost or stolen. The account is frozen. Heat rushed to my cheeks not from shame but from anger. My father. He had moved faster than I anticipated. He had not just removed me as an authorized user, he had flagged the card to humiliate me publicly. Behind me, a woman in yoga pants sighed loudly, checking her watch. I have another card, I said calmly, reaching for my wallet. But before I could pull out my personal debit card, a familiar shrill voice echoed from the automatic doors. Oh my God, Keisha! Is Daddy finally cutting you off? I turned to see Tia walking in wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a designer purse that cost more than the cashier's car. She strutted over to the register, enjoying the audience. I told Dad he should have done it years ago. You are 32 years old, Keisha. It is embarrassing that you are still grocery shopping on his dime. I stared at her, feeling the eyes of everyone in the store on us. Tia, I said, my voice low. Go away. Go. This does not concern you. Tia laughed, a harsh sound that grated on my nerves. It concerns me when you are draining my inheritance to buy overpriced kale. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. Here. She flicked it at me. The bill hit my chest and fluttered to the floor. Buy yourself a sandwich. Do not say we never help you. Mom would be so disappointed if she saw you begging like this. The mention of my mother made my vision blur with red, but I did not lash out. That was what she wanted. She wanted the angry outburst. She wanted the footage for her next victimhood post. I slowly bent down and picked up the $20 bill. The store was silent. The cashier looked terrified. I smoothed out the bill and turned to the young man who was bagging the groceries. He was a college student I had chatted with many times, a good kid working 2 jobs to pay tuition. Kevin, I said, holding out the money. For your hard work, keep the change. I then pulled out my own sleek black debit card, one that had no connection to the Brooks family name, and tapped it on the reader. It beeped instantly. Approved. I took my bag, ignored Tia's shocked expression, and walked out of the store. As I passed her, I whispered only one thing. Keep your pocket change, Tia. You are going to need it for bail money. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel. They thought they had me cornered. They thought that by cutting off the family funds they were cutting off my oxygen. They truly believed the lie they had told themselves for years, that I was the helpless, failed daughter. It was almost funny. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the deadbolt and went straight to the large abstract painting hanging in my hallway. It was a piece I had commissioned from an artist in Berlin specifically for its dimensions. I gripped the frame and swung it open, revealing a wall safe embedded in the concrete. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner and typed in a 12-digit code. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, there were no family heirlooms or pearls. Instead, there were stacks of documents bound in leather. I pulled out a passport, but it was not American. It was a St. Kitts and Nevis citizenship by investment passport. Beside it lay 3 RSA security tokens for banks in Zurich, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. I picked up the black token for the Swiss account and pressed the button. A blue code flashed on the tiny screen. I logged into my laptop and navigated to a secure portal. My balance loaded on the screen, a number with so many zeros it would have given my father a heart attack. I was not just a freelancer. I was the silent majority shareholder of Helios Capital. I had spent the last decade building wealth in the shadows, investing in tech startups that my father had laughed at. I had bought my own freedom years ago. I picked up a file labeled Project Icarus. Inside was the loan agreement my father had signed with Helios Capital 5 years ago to save his company. He had signed it with a faceless investment firm, never knowing that the hand holding the pen on the other side was his own daughter's. I ran my finger over his signature. He had breached the morality clause of the contract today. By filing a false police report and attacking a board member, he had just handed me the keys to his kingdom. I closed the safe and sat back in my chair. They wanted to starve me out. Fine. I would just have to buy the restaurant. 2 days later, I stood outside the gilded double doors of the Four Seasons ballroom, taking a moment to center myself. My father had named the event the Evelyn Brooks Memorial Gala, a title that made bile rise in my throat. He was parading my mother's name and her tragic death to squeeze donations out of Chicago's elite, all to plug the holes in a sinking company ship he had steered into an iceberg. I was not on the guest list. In fact, my name had been explicitly blacklisted at the door. But security had waved me through without a second glance because when your shell company owns a 10% stake in the hotel chain, you do not need an invitation, you own the venue. I was not wearing the frumpy, oversized clothes my family was used to seeing me in. Tonight, I wore a midnight blue silk gown that fit like a second skin tailored to perfection, with diamond drop earrings that were real, not costume. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped into the lion's den. The room was a sea of tuxedos and designer dresses. A jazz band played softly in the corner, and in the center of the stage a massive portrait of my mother looked down on the crowd. Seeing her face used as a prop for my father's greed made my hands curl into fists, but I forced them to relax. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray and began to circulate. I had barely taken 3 steps when a hand clamped onto my upper arm. The grip was painful bruising. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of expensive cologne and desperation was unmistakable. "What the hell do you think you are doing here?" Hunter's voice was a low hiss in my ear. He spun me around, attempting to use his height to intimidate me. His face was flushed, likely from the open bar, and the stress of the impending audit he did not know was coming. I told security to keep the trash out. "You are making a scene, Keisha. Look at you. You look ridiculous playing dress-up in a gown you probably bought on credit you do not have." I pulled my arm from his grasp with a sharp, confident movement that surprised him. "I am here to pay my respects to my mother, Hunter. Unless you want to explain to the senator standing 10 feet away why you are physically assaulting the deceased's daughter, I suggest you lower your voice." Hunter glanced nervously over his shoulder, seeing the room was watching. He forced a tight, fake smile, but his eyes were murderous. "You have 5 minutes to drink that cheap champagne and leave. If you are still here when Dad takes the stage, I will have you dragged out by your hair. Do not test me, Keisha. You are already on thin ice with the police report. Do you want a disorderly conduct charge to add to your mental breakdown file?" Before I could answer, a deep baritone voice interrupted us. "Ms. Brooks, it is an absolute honor to finally see you in person." We both turned. Standing there was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Orion Tech, and one of the wealthiest men in the Midwest. He was the kind of investor my father dreamed of, landing a whale that could save the company with a single check. Hunter immediately straightened his tie, his entire demeanor shifting from bully to sycophant in a split second. "Mr. Thorne," Hunter said, stepping in front of me, extending his hand eagerly. "I am so glad you could make it. I am Hunter, the CFO of Brooks Logistics. We spoke on the phone. This is just my sister-in-law. She was just leaving. She is not involved in the business side of things." Hunter tried to usher me away with a dismissive wave of his hand, assuming Marcus was just being polite to the grieving family. Marcus ignored Hunter's outstretched hand completely. His eyes remained fixed on me, filled with genuine respect. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with Keisha. I received your notes on the emerging market trends in Southeast Asia, Ms. Brooks. Your analysis was brilliant. The way you predicted the supply chain shift was prophetic. I would love to discuss your thoughts on the new trade tariffs if you have a moment." Hunter looked between us, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a computer that had encountered a fatal error. "Notes," he stammered. "Keisha wrote notes." "Mr. Thorne, you must be mistaken. Keisha is She is a writer. She writes blogs. She does not know anything about supply chains." Marcus finally looked at Hunter, his expression cooling instantly. "Intelligence often hides where arrogance fails to look, young man. I suggest you let the lady speak." I smiled at Marcus, a genuine warm smile. "Thank you, Marcus. I would love to discuss the tariffs. Perhaps we can grab lunch next week when the dust settles from all of this. I gestured vaguely to the room. Marcus nodded, understanding the subtext. I look forward to it. He walked away, leaving Hunter standing there looking as if he had been slapped. Hunter turned to me, his face a mask of confusion and suspicion. What was that? How do you know Marcus Thorne? What notes was he talking about? You are sleeping with him, aren't you? That is the only explanation. You are sleeping your way into rooms you do not belong in. It was pathetic, really. His mind was so small, he could not conceive of a world where I was his intellectual superior. I stepped in close to him, invading his personal space for the first time. I reached out and straightened his silk tie, patting his chest gently. It looked like an affectionate gesture from a distance, but up close my eyes were cold steel. You are asking the wrong questions, Hunter. You should be asking yourself why a billionaire tech mogul knows my name and ignores yours. I leaned up to his ear, lowering my voice to a whisper. And you should be careful with this tie. It looks a little tight. In fact, I think it is tightening around your neck more than you realize. Enjoy the party, Hunter. It is going to be the last one you attend as a free man. I pulled back, gave him a dazzling smile, and walked away into the crowd, leaving him tugging at his collar, staring after me with fear finally beginning to dawn in his eyes. After Hunter retreated into the crowd licking his wounds, I remained near the edge of the ballroom, observing the sharks circling the buffet. I knew my presence was unsettling them, but I also knew they would not let the evening end without one final attempt to destroy me. They needed a spectacle. They needed proof for the narrative they were spinning. 10 minutes later, it arrived in the form of my sister Tia. She approached me holding 2 crystal flutes filled with a sparkling amber liquid. Her face was softened into a mask of sisterly concern, the kind she usually reserved for her apology videos on social media after she had said something offensive. Keisha, she said softly, offering me one of the glasses. Look, let us not fight tonight. It is Mom's memorial. I know we have had our differences, and I know Dad is being difficult, but we are still sisters. Can we just have a toast to Mom, please? I looked at the glass, and then at her. In the old days, I would have melted at this gesture. I would have taken the drink, hugged her, and apologized for things I had not done just to keep the peace. But I was not that Keisha anymore. I looked closely at the drink. The bubbles were rising a little too quickly, and there was a faint, cloudy residue near the lime twist. It was amateur work. She had crushed something into it, probably a sedative or a muscle relaxant strong enough to make me slur my words and look disoriented. I knew I should pour it into the nearest potted plant. But I also knew that to win a war, you sometimes have to walk willingly into a trap to spring it on the hunter. I needed them to commit a crime. I needed undeniable proof that they were actively trying to harm me, not just financially, but physically. So I reached out and took the glass. To Mom, I said, my voice steady. I brought the glass to my lips. I tilted my head back and let the liquid touch my tongue, but I did not swallow. I expertly let it flow back into the glass as I lowered it, concealing the motion with a cough. I held the glass in my hand, pretending to feel the effects almost immediately. I counted to 30. Then I let my eyelids droop. I swayed slightly to the left, grabbing the edge of a high-top table for support. Tia was watching me with the intensity of a predator. As soon as my hand slipped from the table, knocking a silver fork to the floor, she sprang into action. She did not help me. She stepped back and let out a scream that stopped the entire party. Oh my God, Keisha. Not again. The room went silent. The jazz band stopped playing. Tia covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with fake horror. You promised you were clean. You promised you would not use tonight. Look at you. You are high as a kite. I played my part perfectly. I stumbled forward, reaching out as if to steady myself on her arm. She recoiled as if I were contagious. Don't touch me, she shrieked. Someone help her. She is overdosing. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I heard the words addict and unstable floating in the air. My father appeared from the VIP section, his face purple with rage. He did not look at my eyes to check for pupil dilation. He did not check my pulse. He saw a liability, and he wanted it gone. "Get her out of here!" Desmond roared at the security team. "Get this junkie out of my hotel before she ruins my wife's memory." Two large security guards grabbed me by the arms. They were not gentle. They dragged me backward, my heels scuffing against the polished marble floor. I let my head loll to the side, catching a glimpse of Hunter standing next to Tia. He was filming the entire thing on his phone, a smug grin plastered across his face. He thought he had the smoking gun. He thought he had just documented my descent into madness. The guards dragged me through the lobby past the horrified guests and threw me out onto the concrete sidewalk. "Stay out," the head guard spat. "If you come back, we call the cops." I lay on the cold ground for a moment, until the heavy doors clicked shut. The night air was biting, but it felt clean compared to the toxicity inside. Slowly, I stood up. I brushed the dust off my silk gown and straightened my spine. The dizziness vanished instantly. The slur was gone. I reached up to the neckline of my dress, where a large ornate brooch shaped like a black orchid was pinned. I unpinned it and turned it over, pressing a tiny button on the back. A small blue light blinked once. I pulled out my phone and synced it to the device. On my screen appeared a high-definition video file. It showed a perfect angle of Tia standing in the corner 5 minutes ago, crushing a white pill into a napkin and tapping it into the champagne flute before walking over to me. It captured her smile as she handed me the poisoned drink. It captured the lie. They wanted to prove I was a danger to myself. Instead, they had just handed me a felony charge for food tampering and assault. I saved the video to 3 different cloud servers and sent a copy to my lawyer. I looked back at the glowing windows of the hotel where they were likely toasting to my demise. "Enjoy the champagne, Tia," I whispered into the night. "It is going to be the most expensive drink you ever poured." To lock me away in a legal cage, they needed more than just a staged overdose and a false police report. They needed a medical professional willing to sell his ethics for a check. Hunter found exactly what he was looking for in Dr. Eris. He was a psychiatrist who practiced out of a dingy office in the South Loop, a man whose gambling debts were an open secret in certain circles, and whose medical license had been suspended once before for overprescribing opioids. He was not a healer, he was a mercenary with a prescription pad, and Hunter bought him for the price of a mid-sized sedan. The meeting took place in the library of the estate, my mother's sanctuary. I was not there in person, of course, having been banned from the property, but the high-fidelity listening devices I had installed years ago to monitor my aging mother's care picked up every whisper, every scratch of a pen, and every betrayal. They gathered around the heavy oak desk that my grandfather had carved by hand. My father sat in his leather chair swirling a glass of scotch while Hunter paced the room like a general explaining a battle plan. Tia was curled up on the sofa, bored, but compliant, and next to my father sat Veronica, his mistress. She was a woman 10 years younger than me, who had moved into the house before my mother's body was even cold, eager to play the role of the new matriarch. Hunter threw a thick manila folder onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud that signaled the end of my freedom. "This is it," Hunter announced, his voice thick with pride. "Dr. Eris has finalized the evaluation. According to this file, Keisha has been a patient of his for 3 years. He has documented a progressive history of acute bipolar disorder with paranoid delusions and aggressive tendencies. He writes that she has refused medication and that her condition has deteriorated rapidly since the funeral." My father picked up the file, flipping through the pages of lies. He adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the fabricated dates of therapy sessions I had never attended, and notes on manic episodes that never happened. He paused at one page. "He says here she threatened violence against family members during a session last month." Desmond looked up at Dr. Eris, who was standing quietly in the corner. "Is that credible? Will a judge believe she threatened us if she has no history of violence?" Dr. Eris cleared his throat, his voice raspy and nervous. "It is very credible, Mr. Brooks. The police report from the other night corroborates the escalation. The narrative fits perfectly. A woman spiraling out of control creates a danger to herself and others. The courts prioritize safety over liberty in these cases. The paperwork is airtight. I have backdated the billing records to make it look like a long-standing doctor-patient relationship. Veronica leaned forward, placing a manicured hand on my father's arm. Oh, Desmond, you know it is true. Just the other day when I tried to organize the kitchen, she looked at me with such hatred. I honestly felt unsafe. She has these crazy eyes lately. It is terrifying. We have to do this for her own good. She needs to be in a facility where she cannot hurt anyone, especially us. I listened to Veronica add her shovel of dirt to my grave. She had met me exactly twice, and both times she had been too busy assessing the value of my mother's silverware to look me in the eye. But she knew that if I remained in control of the estate, she would be out on the street, so she lied with the ease of a sociopath. Tia chimed in from the sofa, not looking up from her phone. And the video from the party makes her look totally wasted. If we show that to the judge plus this doctor report, she is done. Can we just hurry up and file it? I want to turn her bedroom into a yoga studio before summer. Hunter laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone, even through the audio feed. He walked over to the desk and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote a figure that made Dr. Eris' eyes widen and handed it to the corrupt doctor. Thank you for your service, doctor. You will testify to all of this in court. Eris nodded, pocketing the check. Absolutely. Just tell me when and where. After the doctor left, Hunter poured himself a drink and raised it in a toast. Listen to me, everyone. This is a slam dunk. We have the police incident. We have the video of her stumbling and overdosing at the gala. And now we have a board-certified psychiatrist stating on the record that she is mentally incompetent and dangerous. We file the emergency petition tomorrow morning. By noon, the judge will sign the order. He took a long sip of his drink, looking around the room at his co-conspirators. With this file combined with the raid, the judge will hand over conservatorship to you, Dad, in a heartbeat. She won't even get a chance to speak. It will be over before she realizes what hit her. Then we sell the house, liquidate her accounts to cover the company debt, and put her in a nice, quiet facility where she can write her little blogs in crayon. My father smiled for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile of relief and greed. To family, he said, clinking his glass against Hunter's. To family, Hunter echoed. I sat in my apartment miles away, listening to the silence that followed their toast. They were celebrating a victory they had not yet won. They thought they were holding a royal flush, but they did not know I was the one who had printed the deck. Hunter was right about one thing. The judge would make a decision in a heartbeat, but it would not be the decision he expected. I reached for my phone and texted my lawyer 2 words. Allow it. We would let them file. We would let them drag me to court. Because the higher they built their tower of lies, the harder it would fall when I pulled the foundation out from under them. The envelope that arrived at my door on Saturday morning was heavy, thick, and terrifyingly official. It was not delivered by a mail carrier, but by a process server. A man with a stone face who simply asked my name, shoved the stack of papers into my chest, and walked away without a backward glance. I carried the bundle to my kitchen island, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what I knew lay inside. I tore open the seal, and the words stared back at me in bold, black font. Petition for emergency conservatorship. Petitioner Desmond Brooks. Respondent Keisha Brooks. I read through the document page by page, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It was a masterclass in fiction. It claimed I was incapacitated, unable to care for my basic needs, and a danger to myself and others. It cited the police raid, the incident at the gala, and the evaluation from Dr. Eris as irrefutable proof. The petition requested that my father be granted full legal authority over my medical decisions, my residence, and most importantly, my financial assets. It was not just a lawsuit, it was an attempt to erase me as a human being. They wanted to strip me of my autonomy and reduce me to the status of a child, all to get their hands on the money my mother left me. Just as I turned to the last page where my father had signed his name with a flourish, my phone began to vibrate against the marble countertop. The screen flashed Dad. I stared at it for a moment, letting it ring 3 times. This was the follow-up, the pressure tactic. I pressed the record button on my secondary device, a high-fidelity dictaphone I used for board meetings, and then swiped to answer the call, putting it on speaker. "Did you get the package, Keisha?" His voice was calm, almost gentle, the tone of a loving father, concerned for his wayward child. It was the voice he used when he was trying to sell a bad deal to a skeptical client. "I got it," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Good. Listen, Keisha, we did not want to do this. We really didn't. But you have left us no choice. Your behavior has been erratic, and we are worried." He paused, waiting for me to argue, to scream, to give him more ammunition. When I stayed silent, he continued, his tone hardening just a fraction. "Here is the situation. That petition is already filed with the court, but it is not public record yet. If we go to a hearing on Monday, everything comes out. The police report about the gun, the video of you overdosing at the gala, and Dr. Aris' detailed file about your episodes. Do you really want the whole city to know you are mentally unstable? Do you want your little writing clients to know they are hiring a crazy person?" I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. He was blackmailing me. He was threatening to destroy my reputation, to force my compliance. "So what is the alternative, Dad?" I asked, ensuring my voice was clear for the recording. "The alternative is simple," he said, the greed seeping into his voice. "You sign a voluntary consent form. You agree to let me manage the estate and the trust for 2 years. Just 2 years, Keisha. You can go to a nice treatment center, get some rest, and when you are better we can revisit the arrangement. If you sign, we seal the records. No one has to know. We keep this in the family." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. He thought he was offering me a lifeline, but he was actually handing me a noose. If I signed, I would never get that money back. I would disappear into some facility and they would drain every account dry before I ever saw the sun again. "Are you saying that if I give you the money you will hide the medical file?" I asked, leading him into the trap. "I am saying that we protect family, Keisha," he replied smoothly, avoiding the direct yes, but implying it heavily enough for any jury to understand. "Sign the papers. Hunter will bring them over tonight. Do the right thing. Do not make us destroy you in court." "I will see you in court, Dad," I said, and ended the call. I saved the recording immediately, backing it up to 3 secure servers. He had just admitted that the conservatorship was a bargaining chip, not a medical necessity. He had exposed the extortion. I picked up my phone again and dialed a number I had saved for this exact moment. It rang twice before a deep, commanding voice answered. Julian Sterling. Julian was not just a lawyer, he was a legend in Chicago. He was the kind of attorney who sued governments and won the kind of shark my father could never afford in his wildest dreams. "Keisha," Julian said, his voice warm but sharp. "I assume the papers have arrived." "They have," I said, looking at the stack of lies on my counter. "And I just got off the phone with Desmond. He tried to blackmail me into settling. I have it all on tape." I could hear the smile in Julian's voice. "Excellent. They are getting sloppy. Do you want to file the standard response?" "No," I said, walking over to the window looking out at the skyline that I owned a piece of. "I do not want a defense, Julian. I want a counter-offensive. File the response, but attach the sealed financial audit of Brooks Logistics. And add Hunter and Tia to the witness list. It is time to stop playing the victim. It is time to show them who really owns the board." "Consider it done," Julian said. "Wear something powerful on Monday, Keisha. We are going to war." I hung up the phone and looked at the petition one last time. They wanted to prove I was incompetent. On Monday, I would show them exactly how competent I was at destroying them. The stage was set, and the actors were in place. All that was left was for the curtain to rise and the judge to lean forward. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised slate matching the knot of tension in my stomach. As my town car pulled up to the Cook County Courthouse, I realized that my sister Tia had been very busy over the weekend. The steps of the courthouse were not empty. They were swarming with reporters, photographers, and camera crews from every local news station in Chicago. Flashes popped like lightning as soon as my car door opened. Tia had tipped them off. She had turned a private family tragedy into a public spectacle, ensuring that if I lost today, my humiliation would be broadcast in high definition to the entire city. I put on my dark sunglasses and stepped out. Julian. My lawyer walked beside me, his presence a silent shield against the chaos. Reporters shouted questions that made my skin crawl. Ms. Brooks, is it true you threatened your father with a gun? Ms. Brooks, are you spending your inheritance on drugs? I ignored them all, keeping my spine steel straight and my expression blank. I would not give them the angry reaction they were hungry for. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool and smelled of floor wax and old wood. My family was already seated at the plaintiff table, looking like a portrait of grieving dignity. Desmond wore a suit that was expensive but slightly ill-fitting, making him look frail and smaller than he was. Tia sat next to him, clutching a handkerchief, dabbing at dry eyes. Hunter was furiously scribbling notes on a legal pad, looking every inch the concerned brother-in-law. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Reynolds swept into the room. She was a woman who commanded respect without raising her voice. She took her seat and looked over the packed courtroom, her eyes lingering on the press in the back row with clear annoyance. Desmond's lawyer, a man named Mr. Vance, who was known for being as loud as he was expensive, stood up to give his opening statement. He did not hold back. He painted a picture of me that was unrecognizable. He described a woman who had snapped after her mother's death, a woman who was volatile, aggressive, and completely unmoored from reality. He used the police raid and the incident at the gala as pillars for his argument, claiming I was a danger to myself and the family fortune. Then he called his first witness, my father. Desmond walked to the stand with a slow shuffle that I knew was an affectation. He swore to tell the truth, his hand trembling slightly on the Bible. When he sat down, he looked at me with an expression of such profound sadness that for a second I almost believed him myself. Mr. Vance began his questioning, gently guiding Desmond through the narrative they had constructed. Desmond told the court that he loved me more than life itself. He spoke about how difficult it had been to watch his brilliant daughter decline into madness. Then came the financial dagger. Mr. Vance asked about my spending habits. Desmond let out a ragged sigh, wiping a tear from his cheek. Your Honor, it breaks my heart. She is throwing money away on garbage. Just last month she spent $200,000 on a painting, a canvas with a few blue lines on it. She calls it art. I call it a cry for help. She does not understand the value of $1. She thinks money is infinite. I am just trying to stop her from ending up destitute on the street. I sat there keeping my face impassive while my internal monologue screamed. The painting he was referring to was a rare early work by a German minimalist that had already appraised for double what I paid. It was not garbage, it was a high-yield asset. But Desmond did not know art, he only knew liquidity. To him, anything he could not immediately spend was a waste. But as I looked up at the bench, my heart skipped a beat. Judge Reynolds was nodding slowly, taking notes. She looked from my father to me, and her expression was not one of skepticism, but of concern. Desmond continued his performance, his voice cracking at the perfect emotional moments. He talked about how I refused to let family into my home, how I lived in isolation, and how he just wanted to bring me back to the safety of the family estate where he could care for me. He made himself sound like a saint carrying the heavy cross of a wayward child. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the gallery. Even the court reporter looked sympathetic. Mr. Vance ended his questioning, leaving the image of the heartbroken father hanging in the air. Desmond stepped down from the stand, walking past my table. He did not look at me. He looked at Hunter and gave a barely perceptible nod. A signal. They thought they had done it. They thought the emotional weight of his testimony was enough to bury me. And looking at the judge's severe face, I feared they might be right. The narrative of the reckless, unstable daughter was taking root, and I knew I had to uproot it quickly before it strangled the truth completely. Desmond stepped down from the witness stand, wiping his eyes with a theatrical flourish that would have made a soap opera actor proud, but the real performance was just beginning. Mr. Vance called his next witness, and Hunter stood up, buttoning his Italian suit jacket with the air of a man accepting a Nobel Prize. He walked to the stand carrying a leather binder thick with spreadsheets and financial projections. He did not look at me. He looked directly at the judge, projecting the image of a serious financial professional burdened by the incompetence of his family members. "State your name and occupation for the record," Mr. Vance said. Hunter cleared his throat, leaning into the microphone. "Hunter Sterling. I am a senior portfolio manager at Sterling & Associates, and I have served as the unofficial financial advisor to the Brooks family for 5 years." The lie slid out of his mouth as easily as oil. He had never advised us on anything other than how to fund his own bad investments, but to the court, he sounded like an expert witness. Mr. Vance began to walk him through the financial records, asking him to explain the transactions I had made since my mother's death. Hunter opened his binder and pointed to a series of highlighted figures. "Your Honor, it is a disaster," he stated gravely, using terms like liquidity crisis and negative return on investment to dazzle the room. Keisha has been transferring massive sums of liquid cash into unregistered entities. For example, just last week, she moved $500,000 into something called Helios Capital. I have run a background check on this entity. It has no physical office, no public listing, and no board of directors. It is a ghost company, a shell. In my professional opinion, she is falling victim to online investment scams, or she is laundering the money to support a substance abuse habit. Either way, the estate is hemorrhaging value. If we do not freeze these assets immediately, there will be nothing left by Christmas. The judge looked down at her notes, her brow furrowed. She scribbled something rapidly, looking from Hunter to me. The accusation of funding a ghost company was damaging. It painted me not just as reckless, but as stupid. Hunter continued to drone on, throwing around words like fiduciary negligence and asset forfeiture, making sure to look at Desmond sympathetically every few minutes. Then came the emotional hammer blow. Mr. Vance called Tia to the stand. My sister walked up looking small and fragile in a modest gray dress that I had never seen her wear before. She sat down and immediately looked at me with tears welling in her eyes. When Mr. Vance asked her about my behavior, she did not speak. Instead, she asked permission to show a video. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It showed me at the gala swaying unsteadily. It showed my eyelids drooping, my hand knocking over the silverware. It showed me grabbing Tia's arm before collapsing against a table. From the angle Hunter had filmed it, looked exactly like an opioid overdose. The audio picked up Tia screaming for help and the gasps of the crowd. In the courtroom, a hush fell over the gallery. I heard a woman in the back row whisper, "Oh, that poor girl." The video ended with the security guards dragging me out the door, my expensive shoes scraping against the floor. It was humiliating. It was damning. Tia sobbed into the microphone. "I just want my sister back," she whispered. "We tried to get her into rehab, but she refuses. She thinks she is fine. But you saw the video. That is not fine. That is a woman who needs help." Throughout this entire spectacle, my lawyer Julian did not object once. He sat back in his chair, his hands clasped over his stomach, watching the show with a faint, inscrutable smile. And I sat there doing something that must have looked insane to an outside observer. I had a notepad and a pen in front of me, but I was not taking notes on the testimony. I was drawing. I was sketching a complex geometric pattern, letting my hand move rhythmically across the paper, looking completely detached from the reality of the trial. I saw my father nudge his lawyer and point at me. "Look," he mouthed. "She is not even listening, she is doodling like a child." He looked vindicated. In his mind, my indifference was the final proof of my mental break. He thought I was disassociated. He did not know that I was simply bored because I had already seen this movie and I knew exactly how it ended. Mr. Vance looked at the judge with a grave expression. "The plaintiff rests your honor. The evidence is clear. The respondent is financially incompetent, chemically dependent, and a danger to the family legacy. We ask that the petition be granted in full." Hunter smirked at me from the witness stand as he gathered his papers. Tia wiped her eyes and squeezed my father's hand. They breathed a collective sigh of relief. The air in the courtroom shifted. You could feel their victory. They had laid out a perfect story, supported by police records, medical files, video evidence, and expert testimony. They believed they had won. They believed I was finished. I stopped drawing and finally looked up. I caught Hunter's eye and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Enjoy this moment, Hunter," I thought. "Frame it in your mind, because it is the last time you will ever feel safe in a courtroom." The doors to the courtroom swung open to admit the final piece of their treacherous puzzle. Dr. Aris walked in wearing a tweed jacket with leather patches on the elbows, a cliché of a psychiatrist that would have been laughable if the stakes were not so high. He carried himself with an air of academic superiority, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he took the oath. My father watched him with desperate hope, while Hunter leaned back in his chair, clearly believing this was the checkmate move. Mr. Vance approached the witness stand with exaggerated deference. "Dr. Aris, please state your professional relationship with the respondent." Aris cleared his throat and looked directly at the jury, or rather the empty box where a jury would be if this were a criminal trial. Instead, he performed for the gallery and the judge. "I have been treating Ms. Keisha Brooks for approximately 3 years. She came to me initially for grief counseling, but it quickly became apparent that we were dealing with a more complex pathology." I sat motionless at the defense table. I had never met this man in my life. I had never stepped foot in his office. Yet he spoke about me with the familiarity of a confidant. He described sessions where I supposedly paced around his office ranting about government conspiracies and my father's imaginary attempts to poison me. He used clinical terms like acute paranoia and bipolar mania, painting a portrait of a woman whose mind had fractured beyond repair. "Can you describe the events of June 12th of this year?" Mr. Vance asked. This was the date they had circled on the calendar, the date of the alleged violent outburst. Aris nodded gravely, consulting his fake notes. "Yes, that was a particularly difficult session." Ms. Brooks arrived in a state of extreme agitation. She was incoherent, screaming that her family was stealing her thoughts. When I tried to calm her down, she threw a heavy glass paperweight at my head. It missed by inches. I had to threaten to call the authorities to get her to leave. "It is my professional opinion that she is a danger to herself and others." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My father covered his face with his hands, shaking his head in mock sorrow. Tia looked at me with wide, fearful eyes, selling the lie perfectly. The judge wrote furiously in her notebook, her lips pressed into a thin line. It was a damning testimony. If true, it was enough to lock me away for years. "Thank you, Doctor," Mr. Vance said, sitting down with a satisfied smirk. He looked at my lawyer, Julian, as if to say, "Good luck with that." Julian stood up slowly. He did not rush. He did not look angry. He buttoned his suit jacket and picked up a single piece of paper from our table. He walked toward the witness stand with the casual energy of a man taking a morning stroll. "Dr. Aris," Julian began, his voice pleasant and low. "You have provided a very detailed account of your treatment of Ms. Brooks. You stated under oath that you have seen her weekly for 3 years, is that correct?" "That is correct," Aris replied, sounding bored. "And you specifically recall the incident on June 12th because it was violent?" "I do," Aris said. "It is hard to forget having a paperweight thrown at you." Julian nodded understandingly. "Of course, trauma does have a way of searing memories into our minds." He walked closer to the stand holding the paper loosely in his hand. Now, doctor, I am curious about your intake process. Do you usually conduct these intensive therapy sessions via telepathy? Aris frowned, confusion flickering behind his glasses. I do not understand the question. All sessions are conducted in person at my office in the South Loop. In person, Julian repeated. Interesting. Because I have here a certified copy of your travel records obtained via subpoena from the Department of Homeland Security. Julian placed the paper on the ledge of the witness stand, smoothing it out for the judge to see. Could you please explain to the court, Dr. Aris, how you were conducting an in-person therapy session with my client in Chicago on June 12th, when this document shows that your passport was stamped for entry into Nassau, Bahamas on June 10th, and did not show a return stamp until June 17th. The silence that followed was absolute. It sucked the air out of the room. Aris looked down at the paper, his face draining of all color, until it matched the white walls of the courtroom. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at Mr. Vance, then frantically at Hunter. I might have mixed up the dates. He stammered, sweat instantly breaking out on his forehead. My record-keeping. You mixed up the dates? Julian interrupted, his voice, suddenly hard as steel. Or did you simply forget that you took a vacation with the money Mr. Hunter Sterling paid you on June 9th? We have that bank transfer record too, Doctor. Would you like to see it? Aris slumped in the chair, looking like a balloon that had been popped. In the gallery, the reporters were typing furiously. I turned to look at the plaintiff table. My father's jaw had dropped, hitting his chest. But it was Hunter who held my attention. The smirk was gone. He was tugging at his collar, his face shining with a cold sweat, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal, realizing the cage door had just slammed shut. The door closed behind Dr. Aris, leaving a vacuum of silence in the courtroom that felt heavy enough to crush bones. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous drone that seemed to amplify the sound of Hunter tapping his expensive pen against the defense table, a nervous tick he could not control. My father Desmond sat frozen, staring at the empty witness stand, as if he could will his star witness back into existence to fix the disaster that had just unfolded. They were wounded, but they were not dead yet. I could see the calculation behind Hunter's eyes. He was already formulating a plan B, thinking of ways to spin the doctor's perjury as a simple administrative error, thinking he could still charm the judge into seeing things his way. Mr. Vance stood up, his confidence shaken, but his voice still booming. Your Honor, despite the confusion regarding the doctor's travel schedule, the fact remains that the respondent has shown a pattern of erratic behavior. The family is simply asking for oversight. We rest our case. It was our turn. The moment I had been waiting for since the day they moved my seat at the funeral. Julian, my lawyer, did not call my name. I did not stand up. I did not walk to the witness stand to defend my sanity or beg for my freedom. I simply continued to sketch on my notepad, adding shading to the geometric design, looking for all the world like a woman who was completely detached from the proceedings. Your Honor. Julian said, his voice calm and carrying a weight that made everyone sit up straighter. The defense has no witnesses. We have no testimony to offer. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The reporters looked confused. My father let out a breath of relief, a small smile touching his lips. He thought I had given up. He thought I was accepting defeat. However, Julian continued walking toward the bench with a heavy leather binder in his hands. We do have one final piece of evidence to submit for your consideration before you make your ruling. It is a sealed document, strictly confidential, containing sensitive financial data that refutes the plaintiff's claims regarding my client's insolvency. Mr. Vance jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. We have not had a chance to review this evidence. This is a trial by ambush. Judge Reynolds looked at Julian, then at the binder. Overrule, she said. If this evidence pertains to the respondent's financial competency, I want to see it. Bring it here, counselor. Julian handed the heavy binder to the bailiff, who placed it in front of the judge. The cover was stamped in red ink. Confidential financial security clearance required. The room went deadly quiet. Even the stenographer stopped typing, waiting. Judge Reynolds opened the binder. The sound of the stiff leather cover creaking was the only sound in the room. She looked at the first page. Her expression was neutral, practiced. She turned the page. Then another. Suddenly she stopped. Her hand froze in mid-air. She blinked once, then twice. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and took off her reading glasses. She pulled a microfiber cloth from her robe pocket and wiped the lenses, taking her time polishing them, as if she could not believe what she was seeing. She put the glasses back on and leaned in closer to the page, running her finger down a column of numbers. She looked up, but she did not look at me. She turned her gaze slowly toward the plaintiff table, locking eyes with my father. The look on her face was no longer one of judicial impartiality. It was a look of disbelief mixed with a dawning realization of the magnitude of the lie she had been told. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said, her voice quiet, but echoing with authority. "You stated under oath that your daughter is financially incompetent. You claimed she is destitute, that she squanders money on frivolous items, and that she has no understanding of value. Is that your testimony?" Desmond swallowed hard, sensing the shift in the atmosphere but unable to stop the train he had set in motion. "Yes, Your Honor. She does not know how to manage money. The $2 million her mother left her. I am terrified she will lose it all in a month. She buys these paintings, these useless things." Judge Reynolds held up a hand, stopping him. She looked back down at the binder, then closed it with a sharp snap. "Mr. Brooks, I am looking at a certified audit of a private equity portfolio. This portfolio includes majority stakes in 3 pharmaceutical startups, a commercial real estate empire in Berlin, and a diversified tech fund." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Hunter stopped tapping his pen. His face went gray. "According to these documents," the judge continued, her voice rising slightly, "the owner of this portfolio is not destitute. In fact, the net worth of the assets listed here is approximately $450 million. A gasp went through the courtroom. My father looked like he had been punched in the gut. 400, no. That is impossible. That is a mistake. She is just a freelancer." The judge ignored him. She leaned forward over the bench, the wood creaking under the pressure. Her eyes bore into my father's soul. "And Mr. Brooks, there is one more thing you should know. I see here that this portfolio operates under a holding company called Helios Capital. Does that name sound familiar to you?" My father could not speak. He just shook his head, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "It should," the judge said, "because according to the loan documents attached to this file, Helios Capital is the entity that holds the mortgage on your company, Brooks Logistics. You told this court your daughter cannot manage $2 million. But Mr. Brooks, it appears that for the last 5 years she has been the one keeping your company alive. Your daughter is not just a millionaire, she is your primary creditor, and if she calls in that debt today, you will not just be out of a job, you will be out on the street." The silence that followed the judge's declaration was not just quiet, it was heavy. It pressed down on the courtroom like a physical weight, sucking the oxygen out of the air and leaving my accusers gasping. My father looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His mouth hung open, his eyes darting from the judge to the binder, and finally to me, with a mixture of horror and confusion that would have been comical if the moment were not so deadly serious. Hunter had stopped breathing entirely. His face, usually flushed with arrogance, had drained to the color of old ash. He was a numbers man, and the numbers the judge had just read out were crashing through his mind, destroying every calculation he had ever made about me. I finally placed my pen down on the table. The geometric sketch I had been working on was finished, just like their charade. I stood up. I did not rush. I smoothed the fabric of my dress and walked toward the bench, not as the unstable daughter on trial, but as the CEO addressing a shareholder meeting. The room felt small now. I felt giant. Mr. Sterling called my investments ghost projects, I said, my voice carrying clearly to the back of the room without the need for a microphone. He told this court that I was throwing money into a black hole. He was half right. They are ghosts because they are invisible to people who do not know where to look. But they are certainly not dead. I walked over to the exhibit table where the photo of the painting was displayed, the one my father had mocked as garbage. That canvas with the blue lines is an early Gerhard Richter. I bought it for $200,000 from a private seller in Berlin who needed quick liquidity. It was appraised yesterday for $650,000. That is a 200% return in 6 weeks. I turned to look at Hunter, whose hands were now shaking uncontrollably. Tell me, Hunter, does your hedge fund offer those kinds of returns, or are you still struggling to beat the inflation rate? I did not wait for an answer. I turned back to the judge, who was watching me with a look of intense fascination. As for the shell companies, I continued, those are not scams. They are seed rounds for 3 artificial intelligence firms in Silicon Valley. The transfers Hunter flagged as money laundering were actually capital injections for equity. One of those companies just went public this morning. While we have been sitting here arguing about my sanity, my portfolio has earned more than this entire family has made in a decade. My father stood up, his legs shaking so badly he had to grip the table to keep from collapsing. No, he stammered, his voice weak and thready. No, this is a lie. This is impossible. You are Keisha. You write blogs. You live in a 2-bedroom apartment. You drive a Honda. You cannot be. You are not. He could not even finish the sentence. His brain could not reconcile the daughter he had bullied with the financial titan standing before him. I turned to face him fully. My face was calm, but my eyes were blazing with years of suppressed truth. I live in a small apartment because I prefer simplicity to debt, Dad. I drive a Honda because it is reliable, unlike you. I do not need a mansion to prove my worth, and I do not need a luxury car to feel powerful. I built Helios Capital 7 years ago with the money I made from my first software patent, the one I sold while I was still in college, the one you told me was a waste of time because girls don't code. Desmond flinched as if I had slapped him. I took a step closer to the railing separating us. I let you believe I was struggling because it was the only way to see who you really were. And you showed me. You showed me that your love was conditional on my submission. You showed me that you would lock me in a cage just to pay for your mistakes. But you right. Desmond whispered, tears of confusion and fear finally spilling over. You are just a writer. I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. The writing is just a hobby, Dad. Something I do to relax. This. I pointed to the heavy binder on the judge's bench, the binder that held the mortgage to his company and the deed to his future. This is my profession. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He slumped back into his chair, defeated. Hunter had his head in his hands, realizing that the creditor he had been dodging for months, the shadow entity threatening to foreclose on the logistics company, was sitting 10 feet away from him wearing a dress she bought on sale. They had not just poked the bear, they had walked into the bear's den and handed it the keys to the lock. The judge closed the binder with a decisive thud. It sounded like a gavel signaling the end of their world. The air in the courtroom had shifted from heavy to electrified. My father was still staring at the binder of financial documents as if it were a bomb that had just detonated in his lap. But my lawyer Julian was not ready to let the dust settle. He waited for the murmurs about my wealth to die down before he turned back to the bench. Your Honor. Julian said, his voice cutting through the remaining noise. While the financial competency of my client has been established, we must address the character assassination attempted by the plaintiff. They have accused Ms. Brooks of substance abuse based on a video from the memorial gala. We would like to submit a rebuttal piece of evidence. Mr. Vance, the opposing lawyer, jumped up, looking like a man trying to hold back a tidal wave with a paper umbrella. Objection. We have already seen the video. The respondent was clearly intoxicated. This is redundant. It is not the same video, Julian corrected him coolly. The footage shown by the plaintiff was taken from a distance by Mr. Sterling. The footage I wished to enter was recorded by Ms. Brooks herself using a high-definition camera embedded in her brooch. It provides a much clearer perspective of the events leading up to her collapse. The judge looked at Julian over the rim of her glasses. She was no longer the impartial arbiter. She was a woman who had realized she was being played, and she did not like it. "Allow it," she said, waving her hand. "Play the tape." The large monitors in the courtroom flickered again. This time the image was not grainy or shaking. It was crystal clear, filmed from the perspective of my chest level. The frame showed the ballroom, the guests in the background, and then it focused sharply on my sister Tia approaching me. On the massive screen, every detail of her face was visible. The fake concern in her eyes, the tightness of her smile. The audio was pristine, capturing the ambient jazz music, and Tia's voice, as if she were standing right next to the microphone. "Here, Keisha," she said on the screen, holding out the glasses. "Let us not fight tonight. To Mom." The courtroom watched in silence. Then the angle shifted slightly, as I presumably looked down at the drink. The camera captured the fizzing bubbles rising too fast, a clear indication of a foreign substance reacting with the carbonation. But it was what happened next that made the entire gallery suck in a collective breath. The video rewound 5 minutes. Julian had included the footage from before Tia approached me when I was standing near the pillar, and they thought I was out of earshot. The camera zoomed in digitally. It showed Tia standing at a high-top table, her back mostly to the room, but facing me. She opened her clutch and pulled out a small plastic bag filled with white powder. She crushed a pill into a napkin. Beside her, Hunter leaned in. His face was perfectly framed. "Make it a heavy dose," Hunter said, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom. "Let her sleep until morning. We cannot have her talking to the investors." Tia laughed on the screen, a cruel sound. "Don't worry. This will knock a horse out." She tapped the powder into the flute and swirled it around. The video ended. The screen went black. For a second, there was absolutely no sound. It was the silence of absolute shock. Then, pandemonium broke out. The reporters in the back row were on their feet shouting questions. My father looked at the blank screen, his face draining of blood until he looked like a corpse. He turned slowly to look at Tia, not with love, but with the horror of a man realizing he had raised a monster. Hunter was shaking his head, muttering, "No, no, that is out of context," over and over again. But it was Tia who broke the silence. She stood up, knocking her chair over. Her face was twisted in panic, the carefully curated mask of the grieving daughter completely shattered. "It was vitamins," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "It was just crushed vitamins." She looked tired. I was trying to help her. "It was vitamin B12. She looked around the room, searching for anyone who would believe her. But the jury box was empty, and the judge was looking at her with eyes that were cold as ice. "Vitamins do not knock a horse out." "Ms. Brooks," the judge said, her voice low and dangerous. "And people do not secretly drug their family members with vitamins before a public event." "It was vitamins," Tia screamed again, hysterical, now tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "I did not mean to hurt her. Hunter told me to do it." Hunter jumped up. "You lying little brat. Do not drag me into this. I never told you to drug her." "Order." The judge banged her gavel, the sound like a gunshot. "Order in this court immediately." The room quieted down, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Judge Reynolds stood up. She looked at the bailiff standing by the door. "This is no longer just a probate matter," she announced. "We have just witnessed evidence of criminal assault and food tampering. Bailiff, please take Ms. Tia Brooks into custody immediately, and ensure Mr. Sterling does not leave this building." "No," Tia screamed as the bailiff moved toward her. "You cannot arrest me. I am an influencer. My dad will sue you. Daddy, do something." My father did not move. He sat frozen in his chair, watching his golden child being handcuffed, his empire of lies crumbling around him one brick at a time. I watched it all. my expression unchanged. They had wanted to lock me away. Now they were the ones hearing the click of the handcuffs. As the bailiffs escorted my sobbing sister out of the double doors, the heavy wood clicking shut behind her, a strange and suffocating silence settled over the room. It was the silence of a vacuum waiting to be filled. My father sat slumped in his chair, a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes, staring at the empty space where his golden child had been sitting just moments ago, but Hunter was still twitching. I watched him run a hand through his perfectly gelled hair, his eyes darting toward the exit, calculating his own escape. He thought the storm had passed. He thought that with Tia taking the fall for the poisoning and the medical records being exposed as fake, he could still somehow slip away into the shadows and rebuild his house of cards. He believed his hands were clean enough to avoid the handcuffs. He was wrong. I turned to my lawyer, Julian, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was time for the main course. Julian cleared his throat and approached the bench once more, holding a single thin blue folder. It looked insignificant compared to the heavy binder from before, but we both knew it contained the most explosive material of the day. "Your Honor," Julian said, his voice steady and cutting through the tension like a razor. "While Ms. Tia Brooks has been removed for criminal assault, we must address the root cause of this family's financial distress. The plaintiff, Mr. Desmond Brooks, testified earlier that his logistics company is failing due to market volatility and rising fuel costs. However, the forensic audit conducted by Helios Capital reveals a very different story." Hunter froze. His hand stopped midway to his water glass. Julian opened the folder and placed a document on the projector. "We have tracked a series of 24 wire transfers over the last 18 months. These transfers were labeled in the company ledger as vendor payments to a consulting firm called Apex Solutions for supply chain optimization. The total amount transferred is $3.2 million. Desmond looked up, confusion warring with denial on his face. "Apex Solutions," he muttered, rubbing his temple. "Hunter told me they were the new supply chain consultants. He said they were expensive but necessary to modernize our fleet to compete with Amazon. He told me we had to pay them up front." Julian turned to look directly at Hunter. "Apex Solutions does not exist, Mr. Brooks. It is a shell company with no employees and no office. It is registered in the Cayman Islands. And the sole signatory on that bank account is the man sitting right next to you, Mr. Hunter Sterling." The realization hit my father like a physical slap. He turned his head slowly to look at the man he had treated like a son, the man he had chosen over me time and time again, the man he had trusted with the legacy my grandfather built. "You told me it was the recession," Desmond whispered, his voice shaking with a rage that was terrifying in its quietness. "You told me the fuel prices were killing us. You said we had to cut Keisha's inheritance and try to take her trust fund to save the business because the market was down." Hunter scrambled backward in his chair, holding his hands up as if to ward off a physical blow. "Dad, listen to me. She is lying. These documents are forged. Keisha is trying to frame me just like she framed Tia. You know me. I would never steal from you. We are partners. We are family." I stepped forward then, cutting through his lies with the precision of a surgeon. "Partners do not buy villas in Tuscany with company payroll funds, Hunter." I signaled to the clerk, who projected a new image onto the screen. It was a property deed for a sprawling Italian estate dated 3 weeks ago, paid for in full from the Apex Solutions account. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Hunter looked at the screen and then at me, his face crumbling as the last of his arrogance evaporated. But I was not done. I looked past him to the back row of the gallery, where a man in a nondescript gray suit had been sitting quietly taking notes the entire morning. He had not spoken to the press. He had not reacted to the drama. He had just watched, waiting for his cue. "Hunter," I said, my voice dropping to a conversational volume that somehow carried more weight than a scream. "You might want to save your breath explaining this to Dad. You are going to need it. I would like to introduce you to Special Agent Miller from the Securities and Exchange Commission." I sent him the full forensic file on your hedge fund and your embezzlement scheme last week. He has just been waiting for you to testify under oath, so he could add perjury to the long list of federal charges waiting for you. Agent Miller stood up. He did not smile. He simply adjusted his tie, locked eyes with Hunter, and gave a small, polite wave. It was the most terrifying greeting I had ever seen. Hunter slumped forward, his forehead hitting the defense table with a hollow thud. The game was over, and he had lost everything. Judge Reynolds did not need to bang her gavel to silence the room again. Her presence alone was enough to command absolute stillness. She stood up behind the high wooden bench, her black robe flowing around her like the wings of an avenging angel. She looked down at the chaotic scene before her, at the federal agent standing over Hunter, and the bailiffs guarding the door. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it vibrated with a cold, suppressed fury that made everyone in the gallery freeze. She picked up the file containing the petition my father had signed, the document that was supposed to be my prison sentence, and she held it up for a moment before dropping it onto her desk with a heavy, final thud. "Mr. Brooks, please stand up." My father rose, his legs trembling so violently I could see the fabric of his trousers shaking. He looked small and withered, stripped of the arrogance that had defined him for my entire life. "You came into my courtroom seeking the protection of the state for a daughter you claimed was mentally unwell. You wasted the resources of this court to further a conspiracy born of greed and malice. You sat there and wept false tears while your son-in-law embezzled millions from under your nose. Let me be very clear. If I find even a shred of evidence that you were aware of the forged medical records, I will have you charged with perjury and contempt of court so fast your head will spin. For now, consider this a formal warning. The petition for emergency conservatorship is denied with prejudice. This means you can never file against your daughter again. Ms. Keisha Brooks is clearly not only competent, but she is the only person in this family with any sense of responsibility or integrity." Desmond slumped back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The judge turned her gaze to the empty chair where Tia had been sitting. "Regarding Ms. Tia Brooks, this court is referring the video evidence of the poisoning directly to the district attorney's office. I am recommending charges of aggravated battery and intent to cause bodily harm. To drug a sibling at a memorial service is a level of depravity that I rarely see even in this building. She will remain in custody until her arraignment." Then Judge Reynolds turned her eyes to Hunter. He was still sitting at the table, staring blankly at the wall, his face the color of putty. "And Mr. Sterling, since it appears you have purchased real estate in a non-extradition country using stolen funds, and considering the presence of the Securities and Exchange Commission here today, I am declaring you an immediate flight risk. Bail is denied. Agent Miller, you may take him into custody." The sound that followed was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the metallic ratchet of handcuffs clicking tight. Agent Miller moved with professional speed, pulling Hunter's arms behind his back. Hunter did not fight. He did not scream. He looked like a man waking up from a beautiful dream to find himself in a nightmare. He looked at me one last time as the agent pulled him to his feet. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, only a terrifying emptiness. He realized that the smart, quiet girl he had bullied for years had just ended his life. From the hallway outside, the muffled sounds of T.S. wailing drifted into the courtroom. She was screaming for our mother, a woman she had disrespected every day of her life. My father sat alone at the defense table, his head bowed, listening to the sounds of his family being dismantled. I stood up and looked at the judge. She adjusted her glasses and looked back at me. There was no smile, just a nod of mutual respect. She banged her gavel one last time, dismissing the court. As the reporters shouted questions and the gallery erupted into noise, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had been carrying since I was a child. The cage they built for me was empty, and they were the ones trapped inside. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving behind the debris of a shattered dynasty. The reporters rushed out to file their stories about the sensational arrest of a hedge fund manager and the downfall of a prominent family. But my father remained frozen at the defense table. He looked like a man who had survived a plane crash, only to realize he was stranded on a desert island with no hope of rescue. The space beside him, where Hunter had sat with his arrogance and Tia with her cruelty, was now vacant. Desmond Brooks, the patriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist of financial control, was suddenly just an old man in an empty room. I gathered my files, packing the binder that contained the proof of his incompetence. I moved with deliberate slowness, giving him time to process the magnitude of his loss. When the click of my briefcase closing echoed in the room, he finally stirred. He pushed himself up from the chair, his movements stiff and painful. He walked toward me, not with the swagger of a CEO, but with the shuffling gait of the defeated. He stopped a few feet away, separated from me by the wooden railing that divided the court, but the real distance between us was measured in years of neglect. "Keisha," he said, his voice raspy and broken. I did not know. You have to believe me. Hunter, that man is a sociopath. He showed me charts. He showed me projections. I trusted him because he was family. I trusted him because I thought he was trying to save us. I looked at him, my face impassive. You trusted him because he told you what you wanted to hear, Dad. He told you that you were a genius, and that I was a burden. You did not get tricked. You got validated. Desmond gripped the railing, his knuckles white. Please, Keisha. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But look at what is happening. Tia is in jail. Hunter is gone. The company is all we have left. It is your grandfather's legacy. He built Brooks Logistics from a single truck. You cannot let it die. You cannot let strangers tear it apart. Help me save it. We can work together. You have the capital. I have the experience. We can rebuild. He reached out a hand, attempting to touch my arm, but I took a subtle step back. He was playing the only card he had left, emotional blackmail wrapped in the flag of family tradition. He invoked my grandfather's name, like a magic spell, expecting me to melt into the obedient daughter I had been for 30 years. I looked at his outstretched hand, remembering how many times that same hand had waved me away, dismissed my ideas, or signed checks to cover up Tia's mistakes. I remembered him standing at the gate of the estate, refusing to let me collect my mother's photos. Grandpa left that company to you to build a future. I said, my voice cold and steady. He did not leave it to you so you could use it as a weapon to bully your own daughter. You dishonored his name the moment you stood in this courtroom and lied about my sanity to steal my inheritance. That company is not a legacy anymore, Dad. It is a crime scene. Desmond flinched, tears welling in his eyes. Don't say that. Your mother, she would want us to reconcile. She would want you to forgive. Stop! The word left my mouth like a crack of a whip. Do not use her name. You lost the right to speak for her when you tried to erase her daughter. I picked up my briefcase and looked him dead in the eye. I am not going to save the company, Dad. As the primary creditor of Brooks Logistics via Helios Capital, I have a fiduciary duty to my investors, and my assessment is that current management is incompetent, and the brand is toxic. Desmond went pale. What? What does that mean? It means I am calling in the debt, I explained calmly, as if discussing the weather. All of it. The loans are in default due to the fraud committed by your CFO and your own perjury today. Since the company lacks the liquid assets to repay the $40 million owed to Helios, I am activating the collateral clause immediately. Collateral, Desmond whispered. But the trucks, the warehouses, and the personal guarantee, I interrupted. You signed a personal guarantee 5 years ago, Dad. You put the Highland Park estate up as collateral against the primary loan. You bet the house because you were so sure you would never lose. His knees gave way, and he grabbed the table to keep from falling. The house? No, not the house. That is my home. That is where your mother lived. It was where she lived, I corrected him. But it hasn't been a home for a long time. It has been a fortress of secrets and resentment. And as of this moment, the foreclosure process has begun. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days, he gasped, tears streaming down his face openly now. Keisha, please. Where will I go? I have no money. Hunter took everything. I looked at him and felt a flicker of pity, but I extinguished it quickly. I remembered the $20 bill Tia had thrown at me. I remembered him locking the gate. I hear the guest suite above the garage is nice, I said, echoing the words Hunter had used on me during the reading of the will. Or perhaps you can stay with Veronica, although I suspect she won't stick around once she realizes the ATM is out of order. I turned my back on him, walking toward the heavy oak doors. Behind me I heard him sobbing, calling my name, begging for a mercy he had never shown me. I did not slow down. I pushed open the doors and walked out into the hallway, leaving the ruins of his ego behind. He had tried to take my voice, my freedom, and my mind. In return, I had simply taken back what was mine: the business, the house, and the power. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung shut behind me, muffling the chaotic sounds of the courtroom, but the noise outside was waiting to swallow us whole. I stepped out onto the wide concrete steps into the biting wind of a gray Chicago afternoon. The air smelled of rain and exhaust fumes, but to me, it smelled like oxygen, like the first deep breath I had taken in years. I adjusted the collar of my coat, preparing to descend the stairs toward the waiting town car, but I did not make it past the first landing before a desperate hand grabbed my elbow. Keisha, wait. It was my father. Desmond was out of breath, his chest heaving, his face slick with sweat despite the chill in the air. He looked nothing like the imposing patriarch who had commanded the dinner table for 3 decades. He looked withered, a man whose skeleton had been removed, leaving only a suit filled with fear. Behind him, flanked by 2 bailiffs but struggling against their grip, was Tia. Her mascara was running in black streaks down her cheeks, and her wrists were bound in shining metal. "Please, Keisha," Tia screamed, her voice shrill and panicked, drawing the attention of every camera lens at the bottom of the stairs. "You cannot leave me here. The judge set bail at $50,000. I do not have it. Hunter froze our accounts. You have to pay it. You have millions now. 50,000 is nothing to you. Please, I cannot go to a cell. I am claustrophobic. You know I get panic attacks." I stopped and turned slowly to look at them. My movements were deliberate, calm, and controlled. I looked at Tia, who was begging for my help to escape the consequences of the poison she had mixed with her own hands. Then I looked at my father, who was wringing his hands, looking at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Keisha, listen to her," Desmond implored, stepping closer, invading my personal space with the scent of his fear. "She is your sister. She made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but she is young. You cannot let her spend the night in jail. And we need to talk about the house. The judge said 30 days, but surely you do not mean to enforce that. I have nowhere to go, Keisha. The company accounts are locked. I am an old man. You cannot put your own father on the street." I looked at him, seeing the calculations still working behind his eyes. Even now, in the depths of his ruin, he was trying to negotiate. He thought this was a business deal where he could trade on sentimentality. "We can work this out," he continued, his voice gaining a little strength when I did not immediately scream back. "I can stay in the guest house like Hunter suggested, just until I get back on my feet. I can help you run the company. I know the logistics. We are family, Keisha. At the end of the day, that is all that matters. Blood is thicker than water. You cannot turn your back on your own blood." The wind whipped my hair around my face as I stared at the 2 people who had shared my home for my entire life, yet had never known me at all. I thought about the locked gate. I thought about the funeral seating chart. I thought about the whispers of mental illness and the police raid at 2 in the morning. I reached into my purse and pulled out my oversized black sunglasses. I slid them onto my face, creating a barrier of dark glass between us. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice low and even, perfectly audible over the clicking of the cameras below. "Blood is thicker than water. But blood is also what you spilled when you tried to destroy my life to save your bank account." "Keisha, please," Tia sobbed, pulling against the bailiffs. "We are family." I looked at her coldly. "No, Tia, we are not family. Family are the people who held my hand when Mom was dying while you were vacationing in Cabo. Family are the people who respect my dignity, not the ones who try to drug me into submission. The people standing in front of me right now are just strangers who happen to share my DNA. And I do not lend money to strangers." Desmond recoiled as if I had struck him. But where will I go?" I shrugged, a gesture of indifference that I had learned from him. "I suppose you will have to figure that out. You always told me that struggle builds character. Consider this your opportunity to finally build some." I turned my back on them and walked down the remaining stairs. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the curb, gliding silently to a stop. It was not a rental. It was mine, bought and paid for with the dividends of the company they said did not exist. My driver, a man named James who had been loyal to me for years, stepped out and opened the door. As I slid into the leather interior, I heard the roar of the press pack. Tia had called them here this morning, hoping they would film my walk of shame. She had wanted a spectacle. Now she had one. The reporters swarmed around Desmond and Tia, microphones thrust into their faces, cameras flashing blindingly. "Mr. Brooks, did you know about the embezzlement? Tia, is it true you poisoned your sister?" The questions hit them like stones. I pressed the button to roll up the tinted window, shutting out their screams and the flashbulbs. I sat back in the quiet luxury of the car and watched them disappear in the rearview mirror, just two small figures being consumed by the monster they had created. James met my eyes in the mirror. "Where to, Ms. Brooks?" he asked. I smiled for the first time that day. "Home, James. My real home. And then to the office. We have a company to liquidate. 6 months have passed since the heavy oak doors of the courthouse closed on the darkest chapter of my life. I am sitting in the sunroom of the Highland Park estate, but it looks nothing like the mausoleum my father kept. I had the dark velvet drapes removed, allowing the morning light to flood the space. The heavy mahogany furniture that smelled of cigars and old money has been replaced with modern cream-colored sofas and vibrant art pieces, including the Gerhard Richter painting that started it all. The house finally breathes. It feels like a home because for the first time in decades, it is occupied by someone who actually loves it for what it is, not for what it represents on a balance sheet. On the glass coffee table in front of me sits a single document waiting for my signature. It is the final closing statement for the sale of Brooks Logistics. I did exactly what I promised. I stripped the company down, sold off the fleet, and liquidated the assets. My father thought this money would be his salvation, but instead, it is going to be his penance. I pick up my pen and sign my name at the bottom of the page. With this stroke of ink, I am transferring the entire $4 million of proceeds to the Safe Harbor Foundation, a charity dedicated to providing legal aid and housing for victims of domestic and financial abuse. It seems only fitting that the empire built on my mother's silence will now be used to give a voice to women who have been silenced for too long. As the ink dries, I sip my tea and look out at the garden where James is teaching a new puppy to fetch. Peace is a strange sensation when you have lived in a war zone for so long. It is quiet here, but not the lonely quiet of abandonment. It is the serene quiet of safety. I do not have to watch my back. I do not have to record my conversations. I am free. The same cannot be said for the rest of the Brooks family. Justice moves slowly, but when it lands with the weight of a mountain. Hunter is currently residing in a federal correctional institution in Indiana. He was sentenced to 10 years for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. The Cayman Islands accounts were seized, and his Italian villa was sold to pay back the investors he defrauded. I heard through Julian that he spends his days working in the prison laundry, a poetic end for a man who spent his life trying to launder dirty money. He no longer wears Italian silk. He wears a number. Tia avoided prison time thanks to a plea deal, but her punishment might be worse for someone with her specific vanity. She was sentenced to 2,000 hours of community service and 5 years of probation. But the real blow was the court order regarding her digital presence. As part of her probation for the cyber-stalking and harassment charges, she is banned from accessing all social media platforms. Her accounts were deleted. Her followers are gone. Last week, I drove past the highway on my way to the city and saw a crew in orange vests picking up trash by the roadside. I saw a girl with messy hair and no makeup struggling with a heavy bag. I did not stop. I did not honk. I just kept driving. She wanted to be seen by the world, and now she is seen for exactly who she is. And then there is Desmond, my father, the man who would rather see me institutionalized than see me independent. He was evicted from the estate 30 days after the trial. He tried to reach out to his country club friends, but news travels fast in Chicago. When you lose your money, you lose your friends. But when you lose your honor, you lose your existence. No one took his calls. He now lives in a subsidized one-bedroom apartment in a senior living facility on the south side. It is clean, it is warm, it is more than he deserves. I pay for his groceries anonymously because, unlike him, I do not believe in cruelty. But I do not visit. I do not call. He has sent letters begging for reconciliation, blaming Hunter for everything, claiming he was just a victim. I burn them unopened in the fireplace. He is not a victim. He was the architect of his own loneliness. I stand up and walk to the camera set up in the corner of the room. This is the final update for the community that supported me through the fire. I look directly into the lens, breaking the barrier between my story and your reality. I know there are people watching this right now who feel like they are drowning. Maybe your family makes you feel small. Maybe they gaslight you into believing that your reaction to their disrespect is the problem. They call you crazy. They call you difficult. They call you ungrateful. I am here to tell you that you are none of those things. You are just waking up. Don't ever let anyone convince you that you are mentally unstable just because you refuse to tolerate their abuse. They called me insane because it was easier than admitting I was powerful. They wanted me medicated because they were terrified of what I would do if I realized my own strength. And if you are wondering about revenge, let me tell you this. The best revenge is not destroying them. I did not have to lift a finger to ruin Hunter or Tia or Desmond. I just told the truth and let them destroy themselves. The best revenge is taking the energy you used to spend trying to please them and using it to love yourself. It is waking up in a house that feels safe. It is signing a check that changes lives. It is looking in the mirror and liking the woman looking back. My name is Keisha Brooks, and I am not the black sheep of my family. I am the owner of the pasture. If my story has helped you find your voice, please like and share this video. You never know who needs permission to walk away and start over. Thank you for watching, and remember to live so brightly that the shadows of your past have no choice but to disappear. Keisha's journey reminds us that your worth is never defined by those who refuse to see it. She proved that silence isn't weakness. Often, it is a strategic pause before the checkmate. When toxic family members try to paint you as the villain of their story, remember that you hold the pen to your own reality. True power isn't about screaming back. It is about living so authentically and successfully that your existence becomes their greatest regret. If you have ever had to build your own table because you weren't welcome at theirs, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience.